And now, already we are on to meeting number 3, which is the a meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole. The meeting will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Mr. Garrick?
Here.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe? Here. Ms. Stevenson?
Present.
Mayor Pressing?
Here.
Okay. Next up, additions or changes to the agenda. There's been a minor change to the agenda as presented, making sure that Dennis Roberts is noted as being one of the elected officials physically present. Are there any other additions or changes? Excuse me, I'm reading the wrong thing. Okay, let's try this again. Are there any additions to the agenda? Failing that, okay. Do we have a staff report on the rental registration program from Gordon Skinner? That would be you.
Okay. Yes, on the staff report for the rental registration program. I wanted to point out that our 2 housing inspectors are in the audience, Stephen Chrisman and Clay Bayer. They're going to back me up if I need any help. The rental registration program was adopted by City Council in January of 07 to be effective in February of 07, and you requested an 18-month review, which is what we have here. And I have copies of the ordinance and one amendment in the packet. The startup of the program was identifying the rental property, and we sent letters to 2,400 people that we believed had rental property. We also posted newspaper articles, and staff attended various forums to educate people. So we're in our 3rd billing cycle now. The billing cycle is from October to October, although the first one was from that February to October in order to get this billing cycle for at the request of the landlords, actually, to be after students had arrived and school had started. So we go from October 14th to October 15th, or October 15th to October 14th. The total revenue raised at this time is approximately $180,000 per year. Rental property owners have complied very well with this. And their obligations to register and to pay the required fees. Of course, there are some resistance, and legal action has been needed in a very few cases. The revenue is provided for staffing, for resources to maintain the program, including the accounting services, legal help, the addition of a 2nd housing inspector, and the increased time for support staff. There are approximately 8,800 rental units in the city of Urbana, and building safety staff is on target to inspect all within 5 years. Previously, our 1 inspector took approximately 10 years to complete that task, and that was only for multifamily. So now Urbana has had its systematic inspection of apartments for many years, with the single family and the duplex renters only on a tenant complaint basis. So this program allows for the single family and the duplexes to be part of the systematic program. During the first 18 months, staff inspected 201 single-family residences and 2,387 multifamily units for a total of 2,588. In the first 18 months, inspections identified 7 major violations in single-family residence, including unapproved bedrooms because of ceiling height, generally in a basement, or they've made one in an attic. Egress problems, where there was no egress from a basement bedroom, or overoccupied dwellings. The overoccupied dwellings was resolved by the people moving. The others were resolved by either a Property Maintenance Code Board of Appeals hearing, which allowed them to remain, or they had to have some construction, such as a dormer was built in one case to raise the height of a ceiling. We are using the classification system in the ordinance after we have inspected each unit. There are 7 single-family, 1 duplex, and 1 multifamily received a Class A indicating no violations. Now, we provided a copy of the classification system, which is provided after the inspections, and that is available online. Two multifamily received a Class C rating, which means they had some major problems that we're looking into, and it will cause them to be inspected more often. The remaining properties received a Class B, which generally means they had minor violations that were taken care of in a timely fashion. In order to obtain public input and comments on the rental registration program and inspection program, a survey questionnaire was distributed. We have copies of both of the questionnaires we sent out. The survey for rental property owners was sent to the Central Illinois Apartment Owners Association. It was available online, and we randomly sent a sampling to 333. The survey results from the property owners included 101 responses, with 54% positive or generally positive and 46% negative. Most people disagreed with the fee amount. 30% said the fee was okay, 70% disagreed with that, and about half of the people who disagreed believed that although there should have been a fee, it was too high. I think that's to be expected from our hearings before we started this. A similar survey was prepared for the tenants and distributed to the local tenant unions, to the Champaign County Housing Authority, and although we've had very few responses, the results were favorable to the program. Those people mainly mentioned that they thought it would make it a safer place to live and more livable. None of them disagreed with the fee. In conclusion, I think the city has been conducting systematic inspections of multifamily since the 1970s, and the rental registration program has allowed the city to expand to the single family and duplexes, as you're aware. Our 18-month review indicates that it was been successful, including an increase in the number of inspections to meet our target range of once every 5 years, the expansion of inspections to all rental property. We have a very high compliance rate. We have adequate revenues to meet the cost associated with administration, including the inspections, the legal department, billing, and clerical costs. And the survey results show a general acceptance or support. So staff recommends that the rental registration program continue, and we welcome any additional changes or improvements that you suggest. Do you have any questions?
We did have one small suggested change in the fee schedule that we would bring forward subsequently along with any other changes suggested. That's for the DSC funded projects.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon Libby. This is a helpful update, and I think the program's on track. I'm mostly happy with it. 2 points that I would make. One is that yes, that suggested change about the DHS or Medicaid funding for properties, I definitely support that. It seems like a very reasonable change, and if you brought that language back, I think that would make a lot of sense to do. My next comment is about the 5-year cycle. I know originally we targeted for 3 to 5 years, and so 5 years is kind of at the outside range. And it's good, you know, we should keep along at the clip that you all are going at and get them all done in 5 years. But we probably need to keep watching, you know, in the next 3 years as the number of apartment or rental units in Urbana goes up. We might have to watch what we have to do with staffing and with the program so that we can keep it at 5, or even as we get more units in town, maybe bring on another inspector and get closer down to the 3 years, because I think ideally that would be good. I think apartment units in this town really get a lot of abuse as people move in and move out and need frequent eyes to make sure that buildings are safe. It's a college town and a lot of turnover here. My last comment is about the Class A's. I'm so glad we had some people who got Class A. And we should do even more to celebrate those folks. This list is great. I mean, I could scan down and I saw the addresses. I think maybe the Park Street address, the 401 Park, might be the one multifamily property. If I was trying to guess by some of these addresses which were the single-family houses and which were the big apartment buildings. But congratulations to all the people who got Class A. Yeah,
It was the
Park Street.
Sure.
So 401 Park, they are the one multifamily property so far that's gotten Class A. That's wonderful. Do you happen to know off the top of your head who manages that property? Oh, okay, okay. So congratulations to them. Even more to celebrate those people who do get Class A. Listing by address is good, but if we list by the property owner or by the company, so that people could really go to the Urbana website where this information is and see who are the people who manage apartments in this town that that follow all the codes and that keep them up the very best. I think the more we can do to celebrate those folks and reward them for being a safe place to live, that's one great outcome of the program. So thank you both very much.
Thanks, Gordon, for your report. The rental registration program and the pursuing inspection program was a significant, attempt by the city to raise the quality of our housing stock that's being made available to our students and other people who come to the community to rent or lease. And I think it's a very important one. I'm wondering, it's on one of the comments here that where it was in the staff report was that staff requests that the council identify any additional alterations to the program and that an amending ordinance can be prepared for consideration at a future council meeting. So I appreciate that. I am interested in looking and reviewing the ordinance and its effectiveness. And as part of that process, and maybe you can tell me whether how this is available to me, I would really like to see a kind of a detailed breakdown of our expenses and how we have both the income aspects of it and also the costs that we have incurred for this program, to see how this program is working financially in the city. For example, one of the things I'm wondering is we're not necessitated to hire outside legal help, and we do have legal help on staff as a regular part of our city process. So I'm wondering how is this, if the city is incurring or somehow paying any kind of legal costs that might be part of the expenditures of this program, and I would be interested in knowing what the costs for the staffing and the hours of staffing, so that we have a breakdown to see if the program's covering its costs, and that information I'd like to see and review.
Most of that you can find in the budget, and it's under community development. Then there's a building safety division, and then there's 2 housing programs that are listed. So this is the last listing in our budget breakdown under community developments, this housing program. We do have one housing inspector that's funded by the general fund. And then there, you'll see the breakdown right there of the clerical, the percent time on the clerical, and the legal costs. And there's a portion of Kurt Borman, our assistant city attorney, that spends time with us on code enforcement and this program, and that should be found there as well.
So we do have legal costs actually incurred in this program. I know that there's a couple of pending cases apparently for compliance. Okay. Okay, I guess I'm really interested in the details of this.
It's in the budget, the annual budget, in that location, and I don't know documents that,
Because this program was intended to be self-supporting, and I'm sort of wondering how it's doing.
okay, well, Ron said we'll just provide that for you.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Gordon, if someone has concern about apartment and they want it checked, can they just call your office and you can kind of move it up the list, or do you do those how do you get something of concern inspected?
Well, tenants can, of course, always make a complaint. and
Right.
We deal with those. We would take it into consideration if we would probably verify if we needed it to do that. But the systematic is going to go around the city, and we kind of like to stay in that order. We send out people, letters telling everybody we're coming to your area. They call us back and make the appointments, and it kind of gives them a chance. So we give them a list of the common code violations. It gives them a chance to do a little work before we get there. So I think they like that. But sure, we're always happy to look at complaints.
I'm happy to hear that a majority of the landlords think it's a program that's working well. And we did involve landlords in the Neighborhood Safety Committee that held hearings on this. We had a lot of discussion, so we did listen to their suggestions. I mean, they didn't like the program to begin with, but I'm happy that after it's been in operation for 18 months that we have a majority of them that say it's working well. And I think we were very interested in what their opinions were, and even on, when do we start the program, when's the billing, the whole thing, they had a say in it. So I'm happy, and I appreciate the work that you've done.
I have all the surveys if somebody would like to stop by and take a look at them in our office. If you want. Staff has compiled them up. They think they have it pretty good.
Oh. Gordon, are you still collecting survey results from the public at this time?
We believe we'll get some more from the tenant unions that we haven't received yet, but I don't know, maybe the residents are just too busy doing student things and not filling out forms.
Mm-hmm. So the individual landlords who have a single apartment or whatever in their homes still have an opportunity to fill out a
Sure
response form. Sure. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is what I was about to rush to say. Oh, we have more.
Just another item on staff report. I passed out a letter from Ed Bland of the Housing Authority, and this was a follow-up from the Crystal View Townhomes item, where John Schneider and I met with Ed Bland and his staff to talk about that commitment to the low-income housing at Crystal View and the other replacement housing from demolition of Lakeside Terrace, which is set forth in our redevelopment plan. So this provides their commitment to us that matches the redevelopment plan and helps to move us along. And they also note some of the other projects that they're working on that will help us meet the goals of that plan. So any questions on that?
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting.
So moved. Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. The minutes are approved. Next, we come to public input. We have a few people who want to speak to us at the time the particular agenda item comes up. But we also have a Carolyn Baxley would like to talk to us. We ask that you give your name and address, and that you limit your remarks to 5 minutes.
Carolyn Baxley, 510 West Main in Urbana, and I'm here to just speak briefly to the parking study. I'm not going to be able to stay for later in the meeting, but I went to the meeting at the Civic Center in which the parking study and the bicycle plan were presented, and I just wanted to reiterate once again, as you start looking at the recommendations from these two, that the retailers on Main Street, and there are 6 of us now on the 100 block of Main Street and 2 restaurants directly facing us. Would humbly like to request your cooperation in looking at alternatives for that would allow for diagonal parking on the north side of Main. We've been requesting this for quite a long time. We know that Bill Gray and his staff have drawn up an alternative bike route plan that would take the trails over to Elm and back up to Main and skip the 100 block of Main Street. And I would like to ask that you seriously consider that. We're very concerned about the congestion that's created on Main from delivery trucks that, and we're talking, several every day to the restaurants on Main Street, as well as our customers coming and going. And we're very much in support of diagonal parking. We think it will speed up the parking process. It will pick us up 8 new spaces on the north side of Main, and we would like for you to seriously consider that as you move into this approval stage for the 2 plans. I want to commend Bill Gray and his staff and Jennifer Selby for the engineering studies. I think they've done a very thorough job, and I think they have now come up with an alternative that would work for this block, and I would encourage you to strongly think about that. Thanks.
Thank you. No further public input at this time. And next on the agenda, we have a presentation from Department of Public Works on the downtown parking study.
This is John Rebell. John is with Rich & Associates, the consultant firm that completed the parking study for us. As Carolyn mentioned, he gave a presentation that is going to seem like deja vu to a couple of you from last week on the parking study results. The merchants downtown, actually everyone in the community was invited, and I think considering the weather, we had a respectable turnout of both people interested in the bicycle portion of the presentation as well as the parking portion. The bicycle presentation that was given that day is not going to be given tonight. Those 2 issues have been separated. That's going to come back to you at a future time on its own merit. There's quite a bit of input still to consider. There is no action tonight on the parking study. Rich & Associates has fulfilled the scope of work, and this presentation tonight to the City Council is really the final component. So what John's going to do is go through in a more succinct manner than the depth of the printed document that you have would indicate, and give you the highlights and touch on the methodology and the recommendations. And then Bill Gray is here, and we'll be happy to take your questions. So, no further ado, take it away, John.
Thank you. Excuse me. We've run into our first technical.
Clint?
It's not up on the screen. Do you folks have this on the screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, the main screen.
It's on the visual monitor.
Ah, okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to just take you through a brief overview of the parking study, taking a look at some of the elements that were examined, what a parking study is, taking a look at some of our findings, and then getting into the recommendations and the hierarchy of those recommendations as they're presented in the report. First, our study area was in general the downtown, University to California, Cedar Street to Urbana Street, encompassing most of the businesses within the central business district per se. We started out doing the parking study by conducting a comprehensive inventory of the available parking, both the public and private, and identifying who the users of that various parking area could be, various limitations on time. Took a look at the buildings within the downtown. This is part of our mathematical model to develop how much parking is needed to service the downtown. So by calculating out the total square footage of the buildings on each block and then applying a parking ratio of parking stalls by use. So for instance, retail would have one use level and office space would have a different use level. Applying those parking ratios to those uses and figuring out how much parking is needed to service the buildings and netting out the available supply that's already there, we're able to come up with some surplus and deficit maps. And then we're able to present the information in a variety of formats that allows us to interpret it and understand it. We also compounded that by doing field observations of the existing parking, actually driving around during the course of a day, every 2 hours, jotting down the license plate numbers of vehicles and studying how long various parking areas are occupied, where vehicles are moving to, when they're moving. This all adds to our empirical evidence. It's one thing to say, well, we have a parking issue, but it's an entirely different thing when you put that empirical evidence behind it to back it up. We also deeply involve the public through a series of surveys, a steering committee, public input sessions, and face-to-face interviews with various developers, property owners, and business owners within the community. An example of some of the data that was collected, we did a number of different thematic maps looking at long-term versus short-term, public versus private parking supply within the downtown. When we can look at it in an aerial or a spatial format like this, it helps us to understand and be able to visualize where the parking is. Taking a look at the utilization of that parking. So in this particular map, we're taking a look at high occupancy areas versus low occupancy areas. And of course, the high occupancy areas are signified in red and yellow versus blue and green for the low occupancy areas. When we're putting together that mathematical calculation of parking demand, it's sort of a looking at the math behind it and figuring it out. But then when we have the field observations to be able to put the two maps side by side and examine the two together, we can really see where the issues are and then back it up with the field observation aspect. The mathematical side of the calculations, figuring out how much parking is needed, netting out the available supply, and then coming up with a surplus deficit map like this, is able to illustrate for us where there are shortages of parking, where there's surpluses of parking on a block-by-block basis. The interrelationships between buildings and parking is very complex. It changes over the course of a day. People visit several different buildings. Sometimes an employee goes out for lunch, so they're a different type of user during that lunch hour. So what we try to do is we try to break it down so we're just looking at one block at a time, treating each block as an island so that we can visually see it on a map and then understand the relationships between the blocks and look for patterns. We examined the future changes. This was done through a series of meetings with, again, the property owners, developers, and extensive meetings with city staff and taking a look at the overall vision for the downtown and seeing where things were going and then attempting to quantify that and seeing what our parking impacts would be for 5 and then 10 years out. Translating that into another surplus deficit drawing, looking at the 5-year scenario, we begin to see where some issues are emerging, particularly in our Main and Race Street area. We see that block number 2 is signified deeply in red. That's because there's a lot of interest in that block, a lot of potential development that could take place there. When we project that further, looking at 10 years out, the deficit once again on that block 2 becomes even more acute. So what were some of our key findings? Well, Urbana has enough parking right now to satisfy your needs. But we do see areas where there are issues. There's shortages of parking. And in particular, one of the things that concerns us a little bit is the availability of short-term parking for our customers and visitors. We seem to have enough employee parking. They're finding adequate parking. There's some spaces available that we could shuffle a few people around, but short-term parking is an issue, and it's really our on-street parking that we try to preserve for customers and visitors. It's the lifeblood of our small businesses, retailers, restaurants in the downtown area. What we did is we took a look at the recommendations, took a look at what the city had been doing in the past, what they're doing now, took a look at other communities, experience from the consulting side, things that we could suggest that might help improve the situation a bit. And what we saw was the city's really been doing a good job with the parking. You have adequate parking. It's being actively managed. For instance, the parking structure, the allocation inside the parking structure between long and short-term parking is varied occasionally to suit the demand. So you're doing a lot of things right. But we've identified a few things that we thought could also be added into the mixture that might really help here. And they're presented, it's referred to as high, medium, and lower priority. Everything is important. But this is almost more of an order of magnitude where we started out with the lower cost, high impact things that you could think about doing. Increasing the turnover or the efficiency of the short-term parking is particularly important here. In order to do that, we need to rethink how the short-term parking operates in terms of keeping it 2 hour and only 2 hour by not allowing things like shuffling or meter feeding. And if we think conceptually about how a short-term parking stall might work during the course of a day, if someone comes and parks in a short-term stall in front of a retail establishment, for instance, and they park there and every 2 hours they come out and feed the meter, they've occupied that space all day. That's one vehicle. And chances are it's not even necessarily a customer vehicle. It could be anybody. If we're keeping that parking truly short-term for customers and visitors by not allowing that meter feeding to occur, then that parking stall during the course of a business day can then service 4 vehicles. And that's what we refer to as turnover. And turnover is really what works well in a downtown. We can have very few stalls servicing a tremendous amount of business when we achieve that turnover. Similarly, shuffling. Shuffling is an issue that some communities deal with where they don't allow meter feeding. So what happens is, for instance, an employee might go out and park on street, go out at their first break and move their vehicle over one spot, go out at lunchtime, move it over another spot, again at their third break, move it again. That's referred to as shuffling. And again, we're really effectively occupying that one stall all day long with one vehicle that isn't necessarily a customer or a visitor. The only way to combat that really is chalking of tires to a certain extent. People get onto that. They figure it out. They wipe the chalk mark off. It doesn't work so well in the rain. But if we use the full capacity of handheld ticket writers, these devices track license plates, and so it recognizes the vehicle. And there's a number of other very creative things that we can do once we start to use the handhelds to their full capacity. Signs are also very crucial. As a visitor to the Champaign-Urbana area over the last 4 years, really, I've been doing work in Champaign and here in Urbana. This community isn't easy to negotiate. When I fly into the airport, I have to print out a map or use my Garmin to figure out how to get downtown. And that level of confusion, I guess, almost translates into parking as well. People don't know where they can park. They don't know how to get downtown. They don't know exactly where they need to go without a really comprehensive sign program. 5 major types of signs: introduction, and then direction, location, and identification. Those first 4 really are wayfinding for vehicles, and then finally wayfinding for pedestrians, because once we get out of our vehicle, it's a transition to a different type of transportation mode. We become a pedestrian at that point. And being able to find our way from the parking area to our destination and back to the parking area again is really important. marketing. This is also an overlooked aspect of parking quite often. Parking can be complex. Business owners don't necessarily understand where they can be sending their employees to park, don't understand the impact of having an employee or they themselves parking on street and using up that customer visitor stall. If we're using marketing effectively, we're advising everybody, the managers, the owners of these businesses, their employees, and customers and visitors to the downtown, where they can park, how to utilize the parking, what changes can they anticipate in the parking system as we begin to implement new things. When we get into the medium priority recommendations, looking ahead to adding supply into the downtown, right now the city Public Works is taking a look at some different concepts for angle parking. And again, I would just point out that short-term parking is really the lifeblood of the downtown in terms of economics for the smaller businesses, smaller retail restaurants. And that's really what you're trying to grow here in the downtown. Urbana is a very business-oriented downtown, and it could really benefit from a growth of really benefit from a growth in that smaller business of retail and restaurant types of activities. Land banking for future parking. As opportunities present themselves, we know from our analysis that over the course of 5 and 10 years, although we have enough parking now, there will be a shortage of parking someday. And as the overall vision for the downtown is to increase densities and uses and to take a look for development opportunities, the city can be an active partner or player in that by land banking for parking opportunities down the road, or even thinking ahead to land banking for potential swaps with developers or any number of different things that you can do to preemptively address parking issues that will occur in the future as that vision plays out. Looking to development options, public-private ventures, and in lieu fees for smaller developments that may want to have access to parking but can't necessarily afford it, would like to maximize their building envelope, and offering sort of a fee in exchange for parking access later on. Upgrading tickets and technology. We talked briefly before about the handhelds and the things that we can do with them because they track license plate numbers and can be docked to a central computer for data updates. We can implement things like a courtesy ticket. And a courtesy ticket is when someone receives a ticket for the first time in Urbana. That ticket can be a freebie, just a thank you for visiting Urbana today. You're parked improperly, and then information on the back of the ticket, for instance, that would direct them to where they should be parking. And that way we're not penalizing customers and visitors to the community, but focusing more on people who habitually abuse the parking. And when we think of habitually abusing the parking or non-payment of fines, the handheld ticket writers, because they track license plates, can identify people who have a multitude of tickets or accumulate a number of infractions over a short period of time. And then we can do things like increase the fine against that particular person to help dissuade them from doing it or encourage the payment of tickets. The lower priority recommendations, and really more expensive things than looking down the road, but considering new parking. We did address in the report where we see the growth occurring and where we think that new parking should be located. And then looking to multimodal opportunities, things like bike trails and pedestrian enhancements, which in the short term don't necessarily impact our parking a whole lot. But over the long run, as people utilize bike trails more, pedestrian activity more, we do see a trend where it helps to alleviate reliance on parking. So less parking can service more buildings. Some of the proposed new parking locations that we looked at, any number of sites are great. The constraints are going to be the size of the available property, ownership. We like to keep any location for parking accessible from a transportation perspective. We like to keep it close to demand. And really, this is just in some future planning. We're not recommending a parking structure at this time. Really what the recommendation is to consider where new parking should be located and to begin to set the wheels in motion as to how we would address that in the future. through land banking or setting aside some capital funds to think about doing that. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
So you didn't have trouble getting a parking space?
No, not today.
I was wondering about your comment on the land banking for parking. With the fuel prices going up, right now they're going down, but I would imagine long-term they're going to go up. Does that feed into your model, or do you just sort of expect the demand for parking to keep going up as population increases?
The variation between the price of fuel and parking demand fluctuates. So when the price of fuel spikes, parking demand does drop temporarily, but then it gradually increases. The other complexity behind the question is alternative fuels. As we start to see a proliferation of electric vehicles, for instance, we still have to park those. So it's pretty static. The other things that you can look at and are included in the model as we think future are alternative modes of transportation. As you begin to take a look at doing something like the zip car, for instance, and the bike trails and pedestrian activity, and as you increase your urban density and mixture of uses, it actually reduces the amount of parking needed to service the building space.
Thank you.
John, thanks for your presentation. To me, the most helpful part is the table of recommendations and all of Chapter 4 that really specifically explains your recommendations. There's two that I don't think I understand, and so I just want to ask, but make sure while you're here that I'm understanding correctly. One of your high priority recommendations is for enforcement personnel, and you provide some info about the fact that there should be a circuit that's covered every 2 hours in downtown. Based on your view of Urbana and other cities, are we currently deficient in the number of enforcement personnel and in the time that we're taking to cover downtown and how many circuits we can do a day?
Well, I'm going to answer the question, and you're not going to like the answer.
Okay, that's fine. We want honest answers.
Every time I come here, I park illegally as a test,
Mm-hmm.
and I've never gotten a ticket.
That's good to know. Yeah. What's your license plate again?
It's a rental. It's a rental vehicle, so it's different each time. One of the keys to having successful turnover is to have consistent enforcement, and it isn't even necessarily the number of tickets that are being issued. It's seeing the person walking the beat. If they're out there, one enforcement person can generally oversee 600 to 800 stalls in a day using the handhelds. So that's our rule of thumb for staffing levels, and it should be consistent throughout the day. Every 2 hours, those on-street stalls need to have somebody walk by them, putting the data into the handheld. What happens is sometimes at first there's a bit of a negative reaction to it. It's here comes the parking police. They're out to get us. But as time goes on, the consistency and seeing those people there and the knowledge that you are going to get a ticket if you park improperly creates an atmosphere where people begin to obey the rules more. And you will, although you'll see your ticket, the number of tickets issued at first will go up, then they'll drop back down to more or less normal levels.
Okay, and so I think that sounds like, based on the number of public stalls I remember us having in the study area, that sounds like 2 to 3 enforcement people for this study area. Okay. My second question that I want to make sure I understand is about ticket collections, which was one of your medium priority recommendations, which basically means that we need to follow up when people get a ticket to do collection activities. In looking at that, are we in that area deficient as well, or describe a little more about your findings in the ticket collections area.
In the report, you'll see the historical ticket collections for the community, and they do vary, and it's not 100%. There's only a certain percentage of the tickets are ever collected on, and there are a number of mechanisms in place to help collect those tickets, and some of them can be fairly harsh. For instance, license suspensions, working through the state, towing or booting of a vehicle for so many unpaid infractions. What we're trying to do is we're trying to increase the collection on the tickets through easier means, I suppose you might say, like doing things like the graded fine to help encourage people to pay. If you're not paying the tickets, then you're going to start getting bigger fines, and after so many fines, you are going to get your vehicle towed or booted.
Great, thank you. Those were my questions. My only comment is I really appreciate the report. I'm going to study it more. And generally, a lot of these recommendations, especially the high and medium priority, make a whole lot of sense to me. Some of them are very low cost. And so to staff, to Pat and Bill and all the staff who worked on this, I'd say the next step is for you all to take a look at the report and try to figure out when in our work plan and in our budget we can fit in some of these things. You know, when can we improve the signage? When can we put in some new structured fine schedules or some new enforcement practices, or changing durations of meters and making sure the employees are here and the customers are there, and when can we put some of these practices into place? So this is very helpful and exciting, so thanks.
Just as a follow-up to that, Brandon, I'd say that some issues, were before, during the study, it became apparent to us anyway, prior to the study being completed. A couple of specific examples are there's money in the current fiscal year budget to replace the parking deck equipment. That was touched on here. The bad joints and structural repairs necessary at the deck, that work is essentially underway. It's been identified, and we have a contractor lined up to do it. So even though those are not no-cost issues necessarily, those, some things are already in progress. Other things, and you kind of hinted at this, cross-departmental lines. So we'll be meeting with finance, with police, and develop some sort of action plan.
Yeah, John, thank you. I'm trying to understand the surplus deficit maps a little bit better on 19, 20, 21. In particular, the three green blocks, two of which we've heard about tonight, and one I know from my own experience. The Main Street marked 9 and 10, and the library block number 4. All three of those show surplus out 10 years, and yet we have a particular retail person on Main Street that's always asking for more parking on her block, and yet you're showing that the real problem is actually down the street for the courthouse. Is the courthouse lack of parking impacting negatively the business portion of Main Street?
Yes. The way that the model works is each block is treated as an island. And again, the complexity of the relationships between parking and destination are, I could never begin to map them out and have it in a logical format. But you're right in your assessment that the courts are short of parking, and those folks are parking someplace. We saw people parking over by the grocery store and walking to the courts, and certainly people must be parking in other locations as well and walking to the courts.
Okay, and then you show the library as having a surplus, which I find surprising given the complaints from library staff.
Right. We show a small surplus on the library block, but we know that they are short of parking. That lot is very full all day long. It's difficult to park in there. We know that from experience when we were here doing our field observations. And realistically, it's people going to other blocks that are just simply parking in that lot, that through signage we could redirect to perhaps the parking garage.
Okay, so we have a surplus in the parking garage. I guess I'm I'm having trouble figuring out what this exactly means and how to use it to guide our policy. You're saying enforcement is the big one. We've talked about diagonal parking wherever we can around on Broadway, for example, us having a very positive effect here, and some time lengths and stuff. The conversation we had at your presentation earlier. But it seems like there's a lot of space north of Water Street. How do we take advantage of that?
Again, through signs, marketing, to help disperse that need, so that people are directed to park over in those other locations, encouraging pedestrian activity. From a policy standpoint, really what this map is trying to illustrate is where the issues do occur, and to allow the reader to take a look at it and think just exactly as you did of where people should be parking. And then that helps us as we think about the recommendations and the issues that we've identified in thinking about solutions and where we can redirect those parkers to.
I have a question just on what are the units that you're using here? Are these like spaces per day, or do they vary depending on whether it's a 2-hour space or an 8-hour space, or what do the numbers actually mean?
Okay, these are actual number of spaces. They're not differentiated by short-term versus long-term. But what this is it's a projection of a time of day that occurs at a peak business day hour. So it's during the week, most likely.
Worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario.
Okay.
For a standard business week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I haven't really had a chance to absorb this report yet, like I'd like to probably. Did you observe? I guess I've had people comment that people love to park as close as they can to their first destination. Do you observe that there's a lack of taking advantage of farther parking, open spaces, or it's obviously a problem of directing people to park a few blocks away from the downtown and then walking into the downtown to do their shopping? Mm-hmm. And I imagine adequate parking signage and spaces would help change that habit pattern. Is this a very common problem in most studies that you've taken on, that if people don't find a space right at the store they're trying to get into, there's frustration and they try to illegally park? Is it?
Yes, to a certain extent, yes. Folks, there's a hierarchy to the parking. On-street parking is the most preferred type of parking. Mm-hmm. And people like to park as close as they can to their destination, which is reasonable for a customer or visitor. We want them to be able to park fairly close to where they're going, have access, be able to take their goods and get it out to their vehicle. And so it's kind of a carrot and a stick approach. The carrots are better signs, but the stick approach is the enforcement side of things, where we're encouraging people to move to these longer term parking areas because they're going to get a ticket. They can't park in front of the stores all day long anymore and feed the meter. They need to park for 2 hours and then move on. Or if they need parking for a longer term duration, then they need to be directed to where they should be parking.
Earlier, and I don't believe that it's currently in effect, the city did instigate, with the help of our transit system, an employee shuttle from outlots to the downtown. And my observation at that time, I was a pretty avid bus client, but I've unfortunately found a lot more car use in my life right now. But I would observe that, yes, these shuttles would come around on a regular basis, and they'd be virtually empty at all times. Now, I don't know if they were used successfully or not. Do you think that there should we really explore shuttling from outlots to the downtown, especially for employee parking? Is this something that comes under the purvey of your commentary?
There's nothing specific to shuttle systems. In general, we're only making recommendations of the things that we're suggesting would be good for the community. Mm-hmm. Shuttle systems will work, but they're very expensive to operate, especially over the long run. And they typically don't work well unless there's some very large employers that will mandate their employees to use it. So in communities that have state and local government facilities, quite often we can implement a shuttle system and have it work very successfully. But in a downtown that's relatively diverse, there's a variety of small and medium employers, it's very difficult to make it work.
Do you think that there's a need for greater alternative vehicle parking in the your downtown area? In other words, we're trying to encourage bicycle use. So do we need to have a very obvious and very convenient major bicycle parking area in the near downtown area? And, something that would also accommodate scooters and some of the newer choices that people are trying to use to avoid car traffic?
The more different types of transportation that you can incorporate into your downtown, the less we need to rely on absolute parking. People use these alternative modes more and more. And as you read through the report, one of the suggestions you'll come across is, as you're entertaining the idea of new parking facilities, consider making them multimodal by incorporating bicycle parking facilities within it, keeping it close to pedestrian routes, using that wayfinding, and then doing things like you've discussed within the community, doing zip cars. And if you're going to do a parking structure, why not put the zip cars right into the parking structure to help add one more dimension to the multimodal aspect of it?
You indicate that the parking deck has kind of very opposite kind of parking availability. The lower deck, or the western half of the deck, is 90% occupied during the daytime, during the peak study period on December 6, 2007.
Okay. That's not a differentiation between, geographically, sorry.
Yeah.
It's a differentiation between the long-term or the permit parking within it and then the shorter-term parking.
Right. Okay. I accept that. So does that mean that the reserved parking has been extremely successful or very unsuccessful as far as being useful to parking in general in downtown?
The reserved parking could stand some more utilization, but that facility is actively managed, so there are adjustments going on internally.
Yeah.
So there's some overselling going on, and there's more short-term parking spaces are added as needed.
So do you think the parking deck is working?
It is working. You need better signage to direct people to park there, and I think that what you'll see is more of a demand for perhaps shorter-term 2 or 4 hour parking within the parking structure.
I totally agree with you about the signage, that it'd be really great to have very clear directions to our public parking lots. So, okay, thank you.
You all received a hard copy of this tonight. It's also available online. If you get inquiries or someone wants to know where to find it. And then we anticipate, as I said at the onset, coming back to you at a time not yet designated to propose some implementation of some of the recommendations.
Thank you. Before we leave that topic, we've got some public input from Susan Tolson. Thank you, Pat.
Susan Tolson with the Atlanta Business Association. Good to see you again, John. I want to just commend the city for going forward and being proactive and really looking at your downtown, because it truly is the heart of this community, and really trying to assess what is our parking situation at this point and what is it going to be, more importantly, in 5, 10, 15 years. So I think that's wonderful, and Pat Paletti did an awesome job of getting the word out. I've been working with him since January when you all got started on this. I guess I just want to stress one thing, and I'm going to use your words from Rich and Associates that John talked about, a low-cost opportunity that we have is to create more angled parking. in the downtown area. I have learned through Bill Gray has educated me that there is a 30% increase in parking opportunities once you go angled parking, and that there are multiple street locations that could benefit from angled parking. On-street parking is the most preferred method for customers. And if you talk to Carolyn Baxley at Cinema Galleries, or Van at Heel to Toe, or Jan with Heartland Gallery, they will tell you that their market, their demographic, comes by way of vehicle. And one thing that Van did say is he does not know what his lost revenue is, because he has only been told that there are occasions when a customer comes by and that there is not an opportunity to park, and that customer leaves. So we don't know what missed opportunities we have right now, but I do want to stress it is more than just Carolyn Baxley. There's Heartland Galleries, Scott with Furniture Lounge, the new retailer that just came in, Pete with La Gourmandise, and also Jack with Maribel. They've all indicated that they'd like to see more parking opportunities in downtown Urbana.
Thank you. Okay. Bill.
With our consultant still here and Pat and myself, I guess I'd like it to be just a simple motion. If you feel that this report is complete, a motion stating such would be fine. At this point, Pat and I have no further direction to give to Rich and Associates for additional work, and if you feel that this is a complete such report, we do plan to look at future implementations of various priorities here in the future. So that's forthcoming, and some of this will require additional consulting help, which would be separate in new contracts, what have you. But for the study and for what we had asked Rich and Associates to provide us, this, from a staff perspective, is what we feel is a complete document.
Charlie?
Move acceptance of the document and direct staff to begin planning short and medium-term implementation of the recommendations.
I second.
I have a motion by Smythe, second by Barnes. I guess this will be by any further discussion. By voice vote, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Next on the agenda, we retake up draft ordinance 2008-10-123, an ordinance approving a third amendment to a redevelopment agreement with Alan Strong at 395 North Race Street. We have public input, Alice Ann Kingston. I think let's see.
Should probably.
And okay, let's go ahead with discussion. If she's outside, Alice? Oh, would you? Okay. Could you give us your name and address and keep your remarks to 5 minutes?
Yes. This is the mic.
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Alice Ann Kingston, and I live at 402 North Lake Street in Urbana. I'm speaking in regard to this third request for an extension for the redevelopment for Alan Strong. And the decision for that is entirely up to you all. I'm going to speak to my own personal, the way that it affects me and my concerns about it. I live in a house facing west on Leal Park, and on my north side and my east side of my house. It is contiguous with Alan Strong's property line, our property lines. On the south side, my property line is contiguous with the edge of an easement that constitutes a portion of my driveway and continues from where it meets my property line over a few feet, and those feet vary according, it's kind of a triangular wedge up from Ray Street, but goes south for a few feet to the edge of the sidewalk, which, as I believe, the city built, but actually belongs to the property owner of whatever the 395 North Lake Street, North Ray Street, which would be the former Helmick's Lumber Yard. My driveway goes straight up from Ray Street to my house and also serves two other houses to its east, and those houses are owned by Alan. And we have not had problems in my access over the years. I've lived there about 30 years, and I love living there. So my concerns are how the building and the footprint, as it were, would be constituted. I actually prefer having my driveway on the south, and however would consider having it altered to the north. And my lawyer and I did at one point present a proposal to Alan in regards to that. So I simply put want my situation as living in a home so close to a redevelopment to be considered in a gracious manner as well as can be done, and am willing to coexist with the redevelopment as it progresses, and would like to continue contact with you all, and would be open at any point to discussion about it. So I'm concerned that the boundaries are clear to you all for my property and for Alan's, and then that I am willing to adjust in a reasonable manner and for various considerations according to whatever would be needed to coexist with it in a peaceful manner. So if any of you all have questions.
Brendan?
Yeah, thanks, Mrs. Kingston, for coming. I really appreciate you coming here. Yeah, somehow this property line dispute has really held up the project for quite a while, and so I appreciate you being here and saying what you did about you wanting to be flexible and find some resolution. And I know it'll, to have construction in the neighborhood will be a little jarring, but I think to eventually have a nice coffee shop and restaurant there will really add value as opposed to just this parking lot that you get next to your house now. Mm-hmm. So I hope the project can move forward. I was wondering when your last, the last communication or last negotiation that you had with your lawyers and Mr. Strong to sort this all out had been. Has there been an ongoing conversation still happening?
It's been at least 2 years or more.
Okay.
And the responses were, I suppose you could say, negative or not. It didn't. There was not continuing conversation about it. In regard to the property line, my lawyer pulled the deed for 395 North Race, sorry, mm-hmm. And the property line does indeed go for Allen up to the, what do you call those things that come up the little ridge on the side of the sidewalk? To curb. They come up to the curb.
Okay, well,
So I don't believe that there is disagreement about the property line. There probably is disagreement as to acknowledgement of the easement, but the easement has existed, and you could call it various things, but the easement has existed for well over 30 years.
okay.
So there's also a use aspect to this, but in fact, and at one point there was a huge water problem for the whole area, and the city did the repairs, and it was in the driveway. I consider that to be of some significance.
Okay, thanks. And
right.
and I would say that, you know, we definitely have a public interest in the project happening soon. The city has already loaned money for the project, and we really want to see a great conference banquet area
Yeah,
of
and
this.
I would like Alan to be able to do what he wishes to do,
So we
just
might
without steamrolling me.
So we might be in touch, because certainly the city has an interest in it happening. We might be in touch, city staff might be in touch with you more to try to hold some more arbitration sessions or some more conversations
Mhm.
about how to work it all out together. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you. Tom?
Yes. Well, some of the items in my report have already been addressed, but you obviously have before you the Third Amendment to a redevelopment agreement with Allen Strong for 395 North Race. The item was originally before committee 2 weeks ago on October 13th and was deferred to tonight to allow staff time to consult with Mr. Strong and to allow Mr. Strong the opportunity to attend this evening. In discussions with Mr. Strong, it was determined that there is still an interest in moving forward with the project, and that it is possible, and to offer him the ability to address some questions this evening. In discussions with Mr. Strong, it was felt that some of the questions that were raised by council 2 weeks ago could be addressed through conversation and didn't necessarily necessitate a change in the redevelopment agreement that you had before you. Therefore, the agreement you have before you in the ordinance is exactly the same as what was presented on October 13th with no changes. I have more of a report, but I defer to Councilwoman.
No, go ahead if you.
I just wanted to get into, I just want to make it clear that there are several reasons why this project hasn't moved forward to this point. And there's been some discussion already tonight about, in relation to the easement with neighboring property owner, but aside from that issue, there's still a business concern as to the financial viability of the project. And that's another large reason why the project has not moved forward to this point. It is important to note that Mr. Strong is looking to make an additional investment in the property by refinancing the property, investing additional money to do site work and demolition. So he clearly has a commitment to move forward with the project, even though there are still business concerns related to the project. There has been conversations this last week related to resolving some of the easement issues. So staff is definitely interested in getting involved in that and resolving those issues. But again, there are still other issues related to business concerns related to the project, aside from all of the easement issues. So Mr. Strong is here this evening if there are any questions, and I'd be happy to try to answer questions as well.
Well, to piggyback on the comment about commitment, I don't know of someone more committed to being a small business owner in the city of Urbana than Allen Strong. He has the Career Cafe in Silver Creek, and I think that he has shown just within those two restaurants what a small business owner, what an impact they can have in the city of Urbana. And I think it would behoove us to move this with the recommendation for approval, because I think we should applaud people who are supporting and committed to the city of Urbana. Yes, that's a motion to move this to the council with the recommendation for approval.
Second.
Of course, I'm very interested in this project as well. The idea of enhancing an existing strong business is, of course, to the benefit of the city. But of course, also we do need to honor the needs of a resident who, lives in the proximity. So I do hope that there will be some kind of discussion, fruitful discussion. We haven't seen any actual possible construction plan that goes beyond the current limits of a recently purchased property that was the lumberyard. I know that Mr. Strong owns the properties directly north of the lumberyard area, but if the building would be extended in that direction, it would basically cut off the access to the resident in the back. So it does seem necessary for a happy conclusion to this case to have some kind of a settlement and an agreement about accessibility to the residential area. Recently, the city decided that it was important for the construction and furtherance of Washington Street, I guess it was Washington Street, or was it Florida? I think it was Washington Street, to purchase a 3-foot wide strip of property to the length of, a quarter of a mile or something like that, from a private landowner, so that the easement would be clear and free to the city to construct and widen the road to High Cross Avenue. So I thought that was a good example of appropriate practice to complete a desired development project, at least from the city's point of view. And I'm not here to advise any of the constituents about how to settle the situation. Alternatives that would be left, I imagine, if there wasn't a possible settlement, would be to consider reconfiguring the existing footprint of the building. A long, narrow building, possibly 2-story, might be a solution to adequately have the space needed to accommodate enough business to make it a viable building. I don't know. I would love to see connectivity to the existing building in some manner, or a real easy access. And I really encourage these kinds of projects, especially as they are near the Boneyard Creek. We have great hopes for the enhancement of the Boneyard, making accessible garden and pathways into the Boneyard Creek basin, and using examples from other communities as an amenity, having outdoor seating and restaurant facilities, near the improved Boneyard area. So it's a great project with a lot of potential. It could be someday that the railroad track will be, made into a pathway, and business will be pouring back and forth through that location. So I do hope that the parties involved will find some means to solve their problem. I guess that, and just to complete my comments, it has concerned me that we've had a number of projects in the city that have had to go into 3rd and 4th level of renegotiation because of their lack of activity actually on the properties. And we have seen improvements in the parking lot, demolition of some outbuildings in the back of the lumberyard, and I applaud those. I guess I'd be willing to support the continued project funding, but soon we have to see some results for the city to continue to financially support it, I think.
Thank you.
Actually, according to procedures, it's not strictly kosher for you to get a second shot, but if you'd like to, please come ahead.
It's very brief. And it's really would come after the project would be completed, really, but it's something that I talked with Bill once about. Ray Street is pretty busy, and it's not very wide, and this is not a complaint, it's an observation that both at Silver Creek and at the Courier, I see people under some duress trying to walk across the street to get to the restaurant, or the opposite, and particularly older people. And it concerns me, and I've proposed putting one of those crosswalk patterns on Ray Street at those points, just to help increase safety. And it was occurring to me that with the banquet center, and particularly I hadn't thought of there being a connection between the two buildings, partly because there's Ray Street, so I don't know what to do, but were there to be any more foot traffic across Ray Street, it could be of even more concern. And it's not that far from where people turn off of University, and sometimes when you make a turn, then you're sort of like zoom, you know, to get down, and so that's just a safety sort of issue that concerns me.
Okay, thank you. Brandon?
Yeah, I appreciate that Mr. Strong was able to come tonight, and wondered if he briefly wanted to come up and just give us some update on the project and answer a couple questions. If you're willing to come up and do that quickly here. Thank you again for coming out. I know you were out of town the other time we first discussed this, and you heard some of the conversation. I'm not going to re-give any of the kind of comments I made that night, but wanted to hear from you a little bit about, first, like Tom had said, there's the easement issue, and then there's the business issue. If the easement issue were cleared up in a week, tell us sort of what your business plans are. Would you move ahead with the project right away, or how do you decide whether or not to go ahead and break ground on the banquet center?
Well, it's something I think about a lot, obviously, and it's a huge project and a huge investment. And one of the problems is that we have seen so much business loss in downtown Urbana in the last 5 years, with the emergence of downtown Champaign, with the emergence of outlying areas. We've lost so much business at both of our restaurants that I'm really concerned about the economic viability of moving forward on a project that large. So that's certainly a concern. We've seen so many business failures downtown. We've seen closings. We've seen the Five Points project not move ahead. I mean, there's just a lot of weakness in Urbana's economy, and so there's a lot of concern on my part about moving forward on that. I still obviously have a lot of faith in Urbana and a lot of investment, and pour a lot of my time. I work probably 80, 100 hours a week between the two restaurants, and it's a huge investment monetarily and emotionally. And moving forward with a project like that is a big step. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't help that the economic situation is down, and then to have the current situation, it's become very difficult to run an upscale restaurant in an area that is surrounded by a lot of deteriorating structure and what seems to be a lack of interest by anybody to develop. When I built that property down there 18 years ago, I really thought that would be the motivating factor that would really maybe encourage redevelopment and some new businesses and people coming down there. And in that time, nothing has happened. If anything, it's just gotten worse. Wendy's closed. The Five Points project is sitting vacant. We've got the Denny's closing. We've got Jolly Roger closing. We've got lots and lots of problems that people are afraid to come down there. We've had we have homeless people that live in the woods behind the Helmet building. People are afraid to come down there at night when they can go downtown Champaign and not have that same sense of fear about where they park and where they're going to get out.
Definitely.
So there are a lot of issues that I have to deal with thinking about moving forward with this. I still have a lot of faith in the project. I think it's a fantastic project, and I would love to do it. I'd love to move forward to it. I wish that's one reason I was so excited about the Boneyard redevelopment. I thought maybe that would be, that area would really inspire, some movement down there. But I've been through probably far more Boneyard redevelopment programs than anybody sitting here has, because I've been through it over and over and over again, and nothing ever happens or changes. So it does get real frustrating. So I'd like to see, I guess me going forward would be much more inspired by a cooperation and initiative from the city moving forward on some projects too, and saying, yeah, we really care about this area. I mean, I really think that that's the future of, if we want to expand downtown and have downtown grow, that's the only area that downtown really can grow. The demise of Jumers, of the Urbana Lincoln, has really hurt downtown. We had, many, many years of people that were international travelers, university people that would come down, that would frequent our restaurants. Those people have all, that's disappeared. So it's tough times.
Definitely. And I can only speak for myself, but I'm certainly committed to seeing this Boneyard plan really implemented, and I'm glad the budget's in the TIF and in the capital improvement plan, and hopefully we get to see construction start soon on the Boneyard project, because I love it. I do hope it catalyzes growth in this part of the downtown. Another question I wanted to ask you about was to the easement issue. So aside from to the easement issue, aside from the business piece, what's your next step on working with your neighbors on the easement? Would you be willing, if the city wants to, again, kind of try to host some negotiation or play go-between to help sort of bring everybody to the table and talk through the options, are you willing to participate in that again? Do you see resolution of that? And if not, are you willing to consider any reconfiguration to the property to be able to build the center without the strip of easement?
I think it's a terrific property. I think it has a lot of great potential. I think that there are some real problems with the site assessment and building a building. I mean, I've gone around that. I'm not sure it's realistic to try to build a building around Alice's house. But I would certainly look at alternatives, and maybe there would be a different type of a development there. Maybe it wouldn't necessarily be in the format that I first envisioned it. Although I thought that was a wonderful plan, and I still am inspired by it. I still think it's a fantastic opportunity for the city and for Silver Creek. Yeah.
Yeah, Alan. Would the new facility be independent as far as the kitchen and the production of food from your current restaurant?
Oh, absolutely.
So here's the thought. It may not be the right thought, but you do own other property in the downtown area, don't you? And you have a very excellent location on Ray Street, but south of Main, which is a very interesting building, which I wonder if you would think of creatively shifting the concept of having this banquet center to a different location of property that you might already own.
Where would that be?
Well, let's see.
So I only own the Courier Building and the Bennett Building. I don't own any other properties.
Yeah, the Bennett Building is what I'm thinking of.
The Bennett Building?
Yeah, the Knowlton Bennett Building.
To tear that down?
No, I was wondering if that would be a useful creative reuse for an existing building.
To
It's an
redevelop
excellent
that
look.
building as what?
A banquet center,
No, it's way too small.
way too small. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
I'm just asking. Just
completely
asking.
unrealistic. I mean, that,
It's a very good location. And
we might have some parking problems, so getting 250 people in that building would be pretty difficult.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I guess one of my concerns from hearing from you is that you don't, I'm not sure about, I guess you have serious business concerns about this property right now. Its viability, I understand from your words, and I'm really interested in encouraging the best possible use for that property to meet your needs, and I don't know what that total solution would be.
Well, what I know is this. I know that I bought that property at auction. I was willing to pay more for it than anybody else there was. And mostly that reason was because I was the one who was willing to go in there and do the work to clear out the rat's nest of garbage that accumulated there since 1961. I went in there and cleared out 485 feet of rotting lumber sheds full of garbage. There were 17 abandoned vehicles on that property. There was garbage everywhere, and I was the only one willing to go in there and do it. Okay, and I did that with my sweat and blood, with months and months of work, and I asked the city to participate, and I said, are you guys willing to help with this? Because I think this is something that will really help move forward, and the city did. And I had a plan, and I still have a plan that I think is wonderful. Not everything has fallen into place to make that work out.
I'd like to suggest that we go ahead and move forward and ask our staff to continue to work with the owner and other individuals with regard to this project. It's a tough time right now, and we need to give him some more time to maybe make this happen. So I'd like to see us move ahead.
I will add one more thing. I'm also, right now, I'm wanting to move forward on the project in a way that I can. I've cleared out the old lumber building. We're preparing it for demolition. I've had a pack of people come through there for weeks clearing stuff out to recycle stuff. I've had recyclers in there. We've made multiple trips to recycle stuff to, the scrap yards and stuff, and we're ready to move forward to get those buildings down, which are really a detriment. I mean, it's really become a dangerous location because it was so ill-kept for so many years, and it really needs to come down. And I think that is the next step forward. And then once that's down, then we can go from there and decide which, what's the best way to move from there.
I have one question. I guess, am I hearing from you, Alan, that your interest is in basically purchasing Ms. Kingston's house and tearing that down as well? I think that was the original plan, versus building around her.
Well, I think what we had originally put forth the idea was to, in a cooperative effort, to see if Alice was willing to relocate to a nicer home. Her home there is pretty dilapidated. It's not in much better shape than the Helmick building is. It's, I doubt that it meets code, and it's a really distressed property. And the idea is that we could find a nice property. And I understand Alice loves it there. She loves the park and the view, and I understand that. But the idea was that we found a better property or location, and we tried working with her for a long time, and she wasn't interested in that. So there was one effort she mentioned earlier about her lawyer had approached us with an offer. It approached us with an offer, but it was attached with a huge monetary figure attached to it, too, for the privilege of my providing her access on the north side of the property and building a parking area for her. So there really wasn't much of a cooperative effort. And it's interesting now that she makes a big point about the easement, and yet she consistently goes around and drives through my property to get out on the north side of my property instead of using the easement that she holds so dear.
Well, I guess I would just encourage you, Alan, to work with the city, and I would encourage city staff to at least consider what could be done to help sort of mediate or negotiate through the situation. Any effort we can put in as the city into helping come to some solution that mutually works for everybody, we absolutely should. We should do as much in this next 2 years to make sure the project can come to fruition as I know you want to do to make it come to fruition.
I just wanted to say there's already been contact this week, and we're definitely interested in facilitating that. So
that would be very helpful. That helps me support this and give it 2 more years of consideration. And Mr. Strong, what you said also makes a lot of sense, that I do sort of look for the incremental progress, and I know you put a lot of blood and sweat into getting the stuff out of that property, and so continued things that you do will help to see that we're getting somewhere towards the eventual redevelopment that I hope comes into place.
I will also say this too, that I won't ask for another extension. I'll either complete this process or I'll pay the loan back and move forward in a different direction.
Okay.
What I was going to say is, I think successful business development, the models all point to taking your existing strong businesses and making them stronger, getting them to expand and all that. So, I mean, in any way that we can get this business expanded, but given the financial situation, I personally don't think 2 years is long enough as I think about this, given the situation. And I think another thing staff needs to talk about is nobody can read the tea leaves right now. The economics are lousy. It may be that we just simply maybe the best thing is just to sit on this for 5 years or something, and give us time to get the boneyard stuff going. We don't know how the rest of the downtown stuff is going to work out. And given the situation, given the economics, I actually, the more I think about it now, the more I'm willing to, sort of put this off sort of indefinitely and merge it in with some of our other thinking. So I'm even comfortable thinking beyond the 2-year point. Now, Alan may be tired of thinking about the project. He's been thinking about it for a long time. He may want to, end it in 2 years, but for the long-term part of downtown and looking at the downtown parking study, for example, we still need to put together all of our downtown thinking. We've started that process. So, I just wanted to say that, I had a lot of questions a couple weeks ago and supported deferring this so we could think about it. But given everything that's developed, I'm comfortable even if we need to add a few more years to this and just let it go.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the cheerful things that have happened, like the Stratford, and also reassure you that the city's committed to redeveloping the Denny's property, and we are looking at the Boneyard, and that was a place that we talked about starting. So I think it'll take a while.
I'm really excited about that. I mean,
Yeah.
I really think that has wonderful potential. And I see the tie-in with the Station Theater and what could be done down there. The fact that it has the opportunity to make Leo Park, which is a jewel of a park that nobody even knows is there because they can't access it. They can't see it or get to it. And incorporating that into part of this overall plan, I think it's just an amazing, potential. It's just, trying to get all the pieces together to work. But it is difficult. I mean, it's become tougher and tougher to try to get people to come to downtown Urbana when they've got all these other choices out there. And we're not, the new kid on the block anymore. We've been there a long time. And when people have a lot of choices, and some places that are newer, flashier, shinier, with a lot better surrounding environments, that's where they go.
I just had one last question. You have a new chef. Did you want to tell us and the public just a little bit about what they could come out to Silver Creek and enjoy lately?
Well, we're real excited. We just put together a complete new menu. We just introduced it last Friday. And we actually, the chef has actually been there a couple of years, but he's just promoted to this position. And we've come out with an entirely new menu, which we're calling New Prairie Cookin'. And it's basically a menu that celebrates the abundance of the heartlands and the foods that we all have come to grow up on and come to love. And it's a whole new kind of perspective, and we're real excited about it, so hopefully everybody will come out and check it out.
Thanks.
Is there any further discussion? Okay. Motion is to send ordinance 2008-10-123 to council with recommendation to approve. Would those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion passes and sent on to the council with recommendation to approve. Next item on the...
Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention that next week, under new business, there will be a subordination for the refinance of the property. So you will be seeing them both on the same evening next week.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Next on the agenda is draft ordinance number 2008-10-126, an ordinance amending Schedule H of Section 23-93 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code requiring stop signs at a certain intersection, Cypress Point at Stone Creek Boulevard, Stillwater Landing at Stone Creek Boulevard, Pebblebrook Lane at Stone Creek Boulevard, Stonebrook Court at Stone Creek Boulevard, and Prairie Winds Drive at Colorado Avenue. Bill?
Just staff looking for a motion to approve this ordinance for council consideration at its next meeting. This was a recent traffic commission discussion.
I'd move that we send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
Okay. We have a motion from Stevenson, second by Smythe. Any further discussion? Motion is to send this to the council with recommendation to approve. Would those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Sent to council with recommendation to approve. Next item, draft ordinance 2008-10-127, an ordinance vacating a public alley block between California Avenue and Urbana Avenue, Illinois Street, and Maple Street. Bill?
Thank you. If this alley looks familiar, it is. We had talked about this some time ago. It was more in the context of licensing a fence across the alley, but this time the discussions focused more on a vacation, partial vacation of an alley, which is just a little bit east and south of the city building complex here. Basically, the requester, Mr. Marlowe, has another property that he owns adjacent to the alley and is in the process of acquiring even a third parcel of land. I have made efforts to contact any and all properties. The hang-up last time was the owner of property at 405 East Illinois. That person is now moved, and the new property owner has not objected to this request. So, what's before you is an ordinance vacating a portion of an alley.
I'll make a motion to forward that to council with approval.
Second.
Motion by Rogers, second by Barnes. Motion is to forward draft ordinance 2008-10-127 to council with recommendation to approve. Any further discussion? Brandon?
Yeah, a quick question, Bill, if you would. Is there going to remain a barrier so people don't drive from the open public portion to the closed private?
Yes, the barricade will remain.
Okay, thanks.
I got one more question.
Dennis?
Bill, is it possible to build on a vacated area?
It is, as long as, well, there's going to be easements, okay, for utilities. The easements will remain. So when you say build, like a fence is okay, but permanent structures is not, because you need to have access to those easements.
Okay, so we're not going to see a garage suddenly appear across this piece of property or something?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Ordinance is sent to the council with recommendation to approve. Next, draft ordinance number 2008-10-128, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance, fire truck purchase 2008.
A 1991 Pierce fire truck, which has really been used longer than its life. We were trying to make it it was the one we thought was in the best shape, and we were trying to make it last a little bit to space out our purchases, but it decided it didn't want to go any longer. And everyone, Public Works and the fire department, and everyone agreed that it made more sense to go ahead and replace it than to replace the engine. So that's what this ordinance does.
Heather?
I would move to send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Stevenson, second by Barnes. Charlie?
Quick question for the fire chief, Chief Dilly. I assume that this truck will be very similar to the one we just got a couple of years ago, and do we end up with sort of efficiency of having similar models or something like that? Same
So
parts?
This is exactly the same spec as the previous engine, and we've tried to sell our engines up the same way, so any firefighter could go to any engine and get the same exact tool out of every compartment.
I'm thinking in terms of replacement parts and stuff like
Yes.
that shared across the.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so,
Yes.
yeah, the efficiency of having all similar equipment, okay.
That's correct.
I
Dennis?
move to send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
Well, we've already
Or
got
do we-
the
oh,
motion
I'm
in a
sorry,
second.
yeah.
Dennis?
Chief, so how does the city then divest itself of a fire truck that has a bad engine?
Well, there's a couple different ways we've discussed that we could do it. There's a company that we used to divest our last piece of apparatus that did have a good engine, or we can put it on eBay. There isn't a great market for it, but there are ways of being able to sell it.
I guess what I was wondering is, financially, would we end up wanting to rebuild the engine anyway and sell it at a higher level, or is it such a used item that it's not really only very small communities would be interested in getting attaining this equipment?
The cost of replacing the engine is between $35,000 and $40,000, which is probably exceeds the value of the piece of apparatus.
Truly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, make a planter out of it. Is there any further discussion?
Public art.
That's it. That would be our public art. Is there any further discussion? With those, the motion is to send ordinance 2008-10-1282 to the council with recommendation to approve. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. With that, we come to the end of our agenda. I call this meeting adjourned. Hail for